So today we're going to go over some strength faith builds that I think are incredibly good. Some of them are going to be considered overpowered, and others are just going to be really fun to play, giving you a really easy and fun time going through not only Shadow of the Erdtree, but also the lands between. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into these 5 builds. So first up, we have the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe build. This is going to be a strength faith build that's going to focus on doing some extreme lightning damage and doing a ton of it at that. Every single enemy that you come across is going to be absolutely obliterated, and the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe is one of the best weapons from the Shadow of the Erdtree in my personal opinion. Blink Bolt allows you to cover a very large distance incredibly quickly, only to be launched up in the air and bring down a heavy physical damage attack, followed by a nice lightning strike dealing some really good lightning damage. Your heavy charged R2s are also going to be fantastic with this Great Axe, and Great Axes were just buffed in one of the most previous patches to swing faster, allowing you to pour out more damage in total. We are going to be buffing the physical and lightning damage with this build, and between the talismans, flask, and buffs, I think you guys are really going to enjoy what we've come up with. So let's go ahead and take a look at the equipment. For this build, we're using the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe at plus 10. You're also going to be using whatever armor set you would like. If you do want to do more damage, use the Rakshasa armor set. I'm using the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. I'm also using the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Lightning Scorpion Charm, as well as the Shard of Alexander. For my flask, I'm using the Lightning Shrouding Crack tier, as well as the Strength Knot Crystal tier. And for my buffs, I'm using Golden Vow and Howlish Abriri. Next up, we have the first of 2 fire builds that are going to be on this particular list, but this is the Queelign Greatsword build. I absolutely love this build. It is so much fun to use. The moveset of the heavy thrusting sword is absolutely incredible, and your charged R2 is going to cover a ton of ground, do a lot of stance damage, and also provide you a really good chance to stagger your enemy. We're also going to add the Flame Skewer Ash of War to the sword, which is a 2-part Ash of War. The first provides a very powerful thrust forward, and the second part of the Ash of War is going to allow you to spew flames from your hand, causing a 2-part volley of destruction. Your fire damage is going to scale solely with Faith with this particular build, so we are going to be stacking a little bit more into Faith than we would with some of the other builds, but I cannot emphasize how fun this build was to play. With this build, you're going to be adding 52% extra fire damage, allowing you to absolutely crush through the majority of the game. We're also going to be using talismans that synergize very well with our armor and flask, and overall I think you're really going to enjoy it. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're wearing. First and foremost, we're using the Queelin's Greatsword. We're also going to be using the Rakshasa armor set with the Winged Serpent Helm to get that extra damage for our Fire Knight attacks. We're using the Shard of Alexander, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Fire Scorpion Charm, as well as the Spear Talisman. For your flask, you're using the Blood-Sucking Crack tier and the Flame Shrouding Crack tier. And for your buffs, you're going to be using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. So this next build that is on the list is definitely my favorite build, I think, in the entire DLC. We're going to be using the Fire Knight's Greatsword with the Flame Spear Ash of War. Not only is its attack pattern one of the best in the entire game, in my opinion, but the Flame Spear Ash of War is going to give you some range while your enemies are closing in on you. Fully charged, you're going to be able to get 35.7 stance damage out of this when it hits, so it only takes a few charges in order to break your enemy's stance. You are going to be doing an incredible amount of fire damage with this build, and everything you're seeing in this particular part of the video is filmed in New Game Plus 2. I was absolutely crushing everything. It does great in the DLC, it also does incredibly well in the base game, and I found that the playstyle between the moveset talismans and flask provides for massive damage, as well as a really fun time in the lands between. We mentioned the moveset earlier, and this weapon is going to have a mix of the Godslayer Greatsword's R1 chain, as well as the heavy thrusting R2 of the Zweihander, so you're going to be getting the best of both worlds, getting a awesome moveset, and the fact that this weapon has not been nerfed just makes me incredibly happy. So let's go ahead and look at the gear. So for this build, ignore the stats on the right side. I'm going to show you the correct stats in just a minute, but we are using the Fire Knight's Greatsword. We're then going to be using the Winged Serpent Helm for that extra Fire Knight ability damage. We're also using the Fire Knight armor and then 2 pieces of the Rakshasa set to give us that extra damage. If you want to do a little bit more damage, you can use 3 pieces of the Rakshasa set, obviously. For your talismans, you want to use the Fire Scorpion Charm, the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Godfrey Icon, as well as the Shard of Alexander. For your flask, you want to use the Blood-Sucking Crack tier, as well as the Flame Shrouding Crack tier, and for your buffs, you want to use Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. And lastly, these are the correct stats you want to use in order to get the numbers and damage from this build. Next up, we have our Black Steel Greathammer build, or the overall fantastic tank build that you can take into the DLC and have an easy time doing it. This build is going to focus on guard counters as well as boosting holy damage as high as possible, providing a ton of stance and stamina damage, breaking enemies' stances constantly. It's always nice to hide behind a shield with an Elden ring. It really negates the majority of the hard bosses within the game. I have found though in different tank builds you absolutely have no range, so we've added Sacred Blade to the hammer, not only buffing the Black Steel hammer, but also giving us a great amount of range and holy damage to enemies. The reason I chose the Black Steel Greathammer for this build is because once you imbue it with holy power, as you do with Sacred Blade, you're then going to get a trail of holy damage on the ground, exploding, causing your enemies to at times have their stances broken. This weapon is absolutely perfect for guard counters, which is why I wanted to test it out, and I was not disappointed. Not to mention, I absolutely love the Greathammer moveset. You do so much stance and stamina damage, and you can easily spec this weapon for a heavy charged R2 build to absolutely crush enemies, bosses, and break stances within 2 hits. So for this build, you're going to be using the Sacred Black Steel Greathammer with Sacred Blade. You're also going to be using the Black Steel Great Shield as well. For armor, you can use whatever you would like. I went with aesthetics this time around. For your talismans, you're going to use the Great Jar's Arsenal, the Curved Sword Talisman, the Retaliatory Cross Talisman, as well as the Great Shield Talisman. For your flask, you're going to use the Holy Shrouding Crack tier as well as the Deflecting Hard tier in order to boost that guard counter damage like crazy. And for your buffs, you're going to use Flame Grant Me Strength, Golden Vow, and Bestial Vitality. And lastly, for our final Strength Faith build of the video, we are going to be using the Devonia's Hammer. Now, before anybody goes to the comments and tells me Ordovis's Greatsword is better, I am aware. I actually have a video of Ordovis's Greatsword if you want to go watch that one as well, and I will leave that linked down in the description below so you can check that one out. But this came to us in the DLC, and it is very, very similar, but it is a colossal weapon, and it is a colossal hammer, which I absolutely love. We're going to have heavy strength scaling with this weapon, and your faith attribute is what is going to dictate the holy damage of this weapon. When I first got this weapon in the DLC, I absolutely fell in love with it. Being able to spin the hammer over your head with Devonia's Vortex and then smash it down on the ground, doing a very similar attack to Ordovis's Vortex, as you can see in the video, shatters through almost every single boss that I went up against. The Ash for Devonia's Vortex is chargeable, so we can take advantage of that, and this is going to deal 27.5 stance damage when it is uncharged, but 52.5 stance damage when it is fully charged. And if you can get a fully charged Devonia's Vortex and then a fully charged heavy charged R2, you are going to be breaking enemies' stances with ease. With all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the equipment so you can see what we're rocking with. Once again, I will show you the stats at the end of this video for this particular build, so don't mind the stats on the right. But for this build, you're going to be using the Devonia's Hammer. You're also going to be using whatever armor set you would like. If you want to do more damage, use the Rakshasa armor set, but I went with aesthetics for this one. For your talismans, you want to use the Shard of Alexander, the Godfrey Icon, the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, as well as the Sacred Scorpion Charm. For your flask, you want to use the Holy Shrouding Crack tier and the Stone Barb Crack tier. And for your buffs, you're going to be using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. There is one more thing you can do to buff this build though, and that is if you do want to equip the Sword of Light to get that 20% extra damage boost for your holy damage, that is definitely a viable option. On the screen right now are going to be the stats you want for this particular build, and I went with a split of 60 strength and 30 faith, but you can tweak this around a little bit depending on if you want more physical damage or holy damage for this build. And guys, there you have it for our Strength Faith build list of top 5 Strength Faith builds that I think are a ton of fun. And none of the patch that came out recently has nerfed any of these weapons so far, so that's really, really good news. But if you enjoy the content, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that bell notification on your way out. I would appreciate it a ton. And until next time, guys, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.